If you go into a therapist's office nowadays and you say, "Oh, I have this problem with anxiety," oftentimes you're going to be given a whole set of tools and skills designed to help you regulate your anxious state. You're going to be given techniques that are designed to stimulate your vagus nerve, that will promote relaxation by activating your parasympathetic nervous system. For example, all of this is good. It's good to know that we have a certain degree of influence over our aroused states. But there are also quick fixes that if we spend all of our time focused on those, on regulating our aroused state, we're focused on the symptoms, we're not going to ever get to the root issues. The result is going to be an endless cat and mouse game where we, the cat in this case, are trying to catch the mouse, which is our anxiety, and get a hold of it, only for the mouse to scamper away again, and then we have to go catch it, regulate, etc. Today, I want to offer you a different framework for thinking about understanding and working with anxiety. I want to give you a route to its origins, to the unconscious. We're going to do that by exploring the work of Freud and exploring a term called signal anxiety. As we dive into the layers of our unconscious mind, the anxiety is typically designed to protect us from, which we'll talk about soon, we're going to open up a pathway that is ultimately going to give us freedom, genuine freedom, lasting liberation from our anxiety. To give you a very brief foray into the history of Freud's thinking on anxiety, he initially thought that repression generated anxiety. He thought that when we tried to repress our libidinal energy, that anxiety was the product of that. However, he later came to reverse his thinking. He came to see that anxiety generates repression, and this is known as signal anxiety. Using the theory of signal anxiety, Freud came to understand that anxiety is a signal to us that something is that we don't like is emerging from our unconscious, something that our conscious mind is going to experience as threatening. Anxiety is the signal that this thing is starting to break free. These thoughts, these feelings, these memories are starting to merge from the land of the unconscious up into our conscious waking life. From there, we leap into repression. We try to repress what it is that's starting to activate so as to keep it at a safe distance. And that's something that we don't like. Well, for Freud, that consists of our various feelings that were linked to some sort of deep-seated childhood trauma. In childhood, we were probably all of us subjected to experiences that at some point overwhelmed us, that left us feeling some degree of helpless, overwhelmed, afraid, incredibly anxious. And Freud refers to all of those experiences as traumatic anxiety. That is the word that he uses for those painful feelings. So signal anxiety alerts us to the impending appearance of feelings associated with traumatic anxiety. And then through repression and other defensive maneuvers, we do our best to keep the traumatic anxiety at bay, to ensure that the traumatic anxiety doesn't actually emerge up into our conscious mind, our conscious experiencing. So let me give you two examples of this. Imagine a baby who is experiencing overwhelming feelings of traumatic anxiety that are linked to previous experiences of abandonment. The baby sees that her mother is about to leave the room. This generates signal anxiety. Now, to avoid a direct encounter with the feelings of overwhelm and abandonment linked to her traumatic anxiety, the baby cries out for her mother to come back, to not leave the room. So this is a defensive tactic designed to keep her mother in the room, to avoid the opening up of the traumatic anxiety into her conscious experiencing. Thus, signal anxiety inspires behaviors that hopefully keep the traumatic anxiety at bay. Now take this same person, fast forward 30 years or 40 years or whatever. That person is now an adult, obviously. Imagine that they're in a disagreement with their partner. As their partner walks away, they feel mild but not overwhelming signal anxiety. Now, this warns them that the feelings of overwhelm and abandonment linked to their historical experience of traumatic anxiety are threatening to emerge. They try to prevent their partner from leaving the room in order to avoid a direct encounter with their traumatic anxiety. Now, most of this is happening unconsciously, but we see the mechanism in play. Signal anxiety lets us know that something bad is about to come into our conscious experiencing, so we engage in defensive maneuvers to keep the traumatic anxiety, the worst feelings, at a safe distance. As the wonderful, brilliant psychoanalyst Don Carveth puts it, check out his YouTube videos, they're great. He says that signal anxiety is the attempt to avoid trauma in the moment by generating a small amount of anxiety, which serves as a signal to institute defensive maneuvers to avoid much larger amounts of anxiety and other overwhelming feelings associated with trauma emerging into conscious awareness. So, in this sense, signal anxiety is a personal messenger that we unconsciously employ in our ongoing project of self-protection. Signal anxiety doesn't feel good, but it's trying to help us, and it certainly feels better than a direct encounter with traumatic anxiety. How do we work with anxiety? How do we work with signal anxiety? We now know that its function is to alert us to the impending appearance of unwanted, painful, and overwhelming feelings. So when people work with this type of anxiety by down-regulating, it is certainly true that that signal anxiety may soften and dissipate. It may be even the traumatic anxiety that's threatening to emerge. Maybe we can down-regulate for that as well. But it's equally true that the underlying conditions that give rise to anxiety will continue on unabated, unimpeded. This is a little bit like whack-a-mole. We have to forever be on the lookout for the appearance of signal anxiety or of anxiety so that we can down-regulate accordingly, so that we can breathe through it, so that we can develop and practice these coping mechanisms. But what if we could dramatically reduce the need to engage in those down-regulating coping behaviors, period? When we stay with our anxiety long enough, we gain access to the aspects of our psyche that signal anxiety is trying to protect us from. For example, we might discover that our signal anxiety is warning us about an upsurge of overwhelming, at least when we were children, feelings of grief, anger, rage, powerlessness, etc. Now, this is where the critical moment happens, because when we see or get an idea, there's overwhelming feelings of panic or grief in here, well, then we can do something profoundly different. We can turn towards them. We can investigate whether or not we need to go on avoiding them, because when we were kids, they were too much for us. We had to find a way to keep them at a distance. We pushed them into our unconscious. But do we really need to go through the rest of our adult life ensuring that we keep them at a safe distance? When we turn towards them, we're going to prove to ourselves that we can handle them. It's a little bit like children, they're terrified that there's a monster under the bed. And the longer that they don't look at that monster under the bed, the bigger and bigger and bigger it comes to appear in their mind. But when they finally muster the courage to peek over the side of the bed and shine their flashlight there, or their phone maybe nowadays, there is no monster. But they could only get to that place of relief by going through the fear and panic that they had originally been avoiding. And so in this type of way of working with anxiety, we don't just try to calm ourselves down and get back to a comfortable state of relaxation, although that might be part of the work some of the time. Instead, we use anxiety as a signal that something is there that we don't want to feel, and then we investigate that exact feeling. We check out for ourselves, A, what it is, and B, if we really have to go on avoiding it. If we realize that we don't have to go on avoiding it, then we achieve some greater degree of freedom in our lives. This approach, instead of trying to whisk away our anxiety, we try to understand it, both the signal anxiety and the traumatic anxiety that it is pointing to. Although such an approach may make use of anxiety regulating strategies, it doesn't mistake those strategies for ultimate solutions. Instead, they're seen as helpful tools that are temporarily required for the ongoing excavation of our deeper anxiety and the feelings associated with it that represent the genuine pathway to freedom. So we learn to downregulate, but we also learn to do the more courageous thing of turning towards investigating and being with, so that we can check out if we need to go on avoiding our anxiety and those difficult, threatening feelings for the rest of our lives, even though we're adults who more likely than not can handle it.